Renee Calloway kept the newspaper clipping in the same drawer for 11 years. It had yellowed at the edges, the way newsprint does, the ink gone soft and gray instead of black. She didn't need to read it anymore. She knew every word by heart, the way you know the words to a song you wish you could forget. But every year, on the anniversary, she took it out anyway. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside her, and she read it one more time. Local man convicted in brutal slaying of Devin Calloway, 19. Devin had been her son, her only son, 19 years old, 2 months from finishing his associate's degree, the kind of kid who still called to check on her even after he'd moved into his own apartment. He had been found behind a shuttered laundromat on the east side of town, and 3 weeks later, a 22-year-old named Marcus Reed was arrested, charged, tried, and convicted. He was sentenced to life without parole. Renee had sat in the courtroom the day the verdict was read and felt something inside her chest unclench for the first time since the night two police officers showed up at her door. She remembered thinking, good. She remembered thinking it without guilt, without hesitation. Someone had taken her son. Now someone would pay. For 11 years, that thought had been the only solid ground she had to stand on. It was about to disappear from under her feet entirely. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, while Renee was folding laundry in the small house she still lived in. The same house Devin had grown up in. The same house where his bedroom remained more or less exactly as he'd left it. Mrs. Calloway? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, careful, measured. The voice of someone who has delivered difficult news before and learned to pace themselves. My name is Angela Ferris. I'm an attorney with the Wrongful Conviction Project. Renee sat down slowly on the edge of Devin's old bed. I'm calling about your son's case, Angela continued, specifically about the man convicted in his death, Marcus Reed. What about him? We've been reviewing his case for the past 2 years. Mrs. Calloway, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to know that none of this is easy, and none of it is meant to cause you more pain. But new evidence has come to light, and given the legal process that's about to unfold, I felt it was important you hear it from us directly before it becomes public. Renee's hand tightened around the phone. What evidence? DNA, testing that wasn't available or wasn't properly utilized at the time of the original trial. We've also identified significant problems with the original investigation. Suppressed witness statements, a jailhouse informant who later admitted to fabricating his testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. Say it, Renee said. Her voice had gone flat, the way it did when she was holding something back by force. Just say what you're trying to tell me. A pause. We believe Marcus Reed is innocent. We believe he has spent the last 11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street, and Renee could hear, faintly, the particular hush of wind through the maple tree Devin had once tried to climb when he was 8 years old and broken his arm doing it. Then who, she said, killed my son? We don't know yet, Angela said quietly, but we intend to find out. And Mrs. Calloway, I have to tell you, given what we've uncovered, we believe the real investigation into your son's murder never actually happened. Once they had Marcus Reed, they stopped looking. Renee did not sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen with the cold coffee and the yellowed clipping, and for the first time in 11 years, she let herself really look at the case the way she should have looked at it from the beginning. Not as a grieving mother desperate for an answer, but as someone asking hard questions. She remembered now things she had pushed down at the time. The detective on the case, a man named Phil Ostrowski, had seemed almost relieved when Marcus Reed was arrested, relieved in a way that had felt strange to her even then, though she'd been too consumed by grief to examine it. The trial itself had moved quickly, almost too quickly. The public defender assigned to Marcus had seemed overwhelmed, underprepared, outmatched by a prosecution that presented its case with a confidence that, looking back, felt less like certainty and more like performance. And there had been a witness. She remembered him now, a man named Curtis Boone, who had testified that he'd seen Marcus Reed near the laundromat the night of the murder, that Marcus had confessed to him later while they were both briefly housed in the same county lockup on unrelated charges. Curtis Boone's testimony had been, by the prosecutor's own description in closing arguments, the linchpin of the case. Renee had believed him. Sitting in that courtroom, grieving, desperate, she had believed every word. Now Angela Ferris was telling her that Curtis Boone had recanted his testimony 2 years ago, quietly, in a sworn statement that had been sitting in a case file while lawyers fought over what to do with it. She called Angela back the next morning. "I want to see the file," she said. "All of it. Everything you have." It took 3 weeks for Renee to work up the courage to visit the prison. She didn't tell anyone she was going, not her sister, not her pastor, not the support group she had attended sporadically over the years for parents who had lost children to violence. She drove 4 hours alone, stopping once for gas, and once because she had to pull over and sit on the side of the road for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. Marcus Reed was 33 years old now. He had been 22 the last time Renee saw him, sitting at the defendant's table in a courtroom, his face a mask of something she had read at the time as cold indifference. She understood now that it might have been something else entirely. Shock, disbelief, the particular numbness of watching your life end while everyone around you nods in agreement that this is justice. He looked older than 33. Prison did that. They sat across from each other in the visitation room, a thick pane of reinforced glass between them, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. "I know who you are," Marcus said finally. His voice was quiet, careful. "I've thought about you, about your son, every day for 11 years. "I came here to ask you something," Renee said, "and I need you to tell me the truth, because I don't have anything else left to hold on to if you don't." "Ask me anything." "Did you kill my son?" Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet, but his voice remained steady. "No, ma'am, I did not. I didn't know your son. I'd never met him. I was 22 years old, working 2 jobs, trying to stay out of trouble in a neighborhood where trouble found you whether you looked for it or not. I was arrested because the police needed someone, and Curtis Boone needed a deal. And I was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, with a record that made me an easy person to point at. Why would Curtis Boone lie? Because the detective on my case told him he could go home if he gave them something. Curtis told me that himself, years later, when we ran into each other again inside. He said he felt guilty about it for years before he finally said something." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I've spent 11 years trying to understand how a person says words that take someone else's whole life away, just to save a few months off their own sentence. I still don't understand it. I don't think I ever will." Renee studied his face through the glass. She had spent 11 years believing this man had taken her son from her. She didn't know yet what to feel now that the architecture of that belief was crumbling beneath her. "If it wasn't you," she said quietly, "then who?" "I don't know," Marcus said, "but I think about it every single day. Somebody's been walking around free for 11 years while I sat in here for what they did. And whoever that is, they took 2 lives that night, your son's and mine. They just didn't bother killing me with a weapon." Angela Ferris met Renee at her office the following week and laid out everything the Wrongful Conviction Project had uncovered. The DNA testing was the clearest piece. A jacket recovered near the scene, collected as evidence at the time but never properly analyzed due to a backlog at the state lab, had recently been retested using methods that hadn't existed at the time of the original trial. The DNA on the jacket did not match Marcus Reed. It matched a man named Greg Tillman. Renee had never heard the name before. Angela explained that Tillman had a record: assault, 2 prior arrests for violent altercations, 1 prior arrest, years earlier, for an attack outside the very same laundromat where Devin had been killed. He had lived 3 blocks from the scene at the time of the murder. He had never been questioned. Why wasn't he ever a suspect? Renee asked. Angela's expression tightened. Because once Curtis Boone gave them Marcus Reed, the investigation stopped. Detective Ostrowski closed the case within a week of the arrest. There's no indication anyone followed up on other leads, other witnesses, other physical evidence. Once they had someone to charge, they considered it solved. Where is Greg Tillman now? That's the complicated part, Angela said. He died 4 years ago. Overdose, which means he can never be tried. Renee finished. Her voice was hollow. It also means, Angela said carefully, that with him gone, the path to clearing Marcus Reed's name becomes both easier and harder. Easier because there's no living person whose conviction depends on Marcus's continued incarceration. Harder because the state has no real incentive to revisit a closed case where the person actually responsible is already dead and can't be prosecuted, regardless of what happens with Marcus's appeal. Renee sat with that for a long moment. So they might just let an innocent man stay in prison because going back and fixing it is inconvenient. It happens more often than you'd think, Angela said quietly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. That's exactly why we need you. Me? The original conviction relied heavily on the emotional weight of your testimony as the victim's mother. If you're willing, and only if you're willing, your support for Marcus Reed's exoneration carries enormous weight. Prosecutors and judges listen differently when the victim's family is the one saying the wrong person was convicted. Renee thought of Devin, 19 years old, 2 months from his degree. She thought of 11 years spent believing his death had at least produced one true thing: justice, however incomplete. She thought of Marcus Reed's face through the glass, the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent over a decade being punished for someone else's violence. I'll do it, she said, whatever it takes. What Renee did not expect in the months that followed was the call from Greg Tillman's sister. Her name was Patricia, and she reached out through Angela's office, hesitant, clearly unsure whether she had any right to make contact at all. They met at a diner halfway between their 2 towns, sitting across from each other in a booth, with the particular awkwardness of 2 women bound together by a tragedy neither of them had chosen. I want you to know, Patricia said, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from, that I had no idea. None of us did. Greg had problems, addiction, anger, things our family tried to help him with for years. But I never imagined. She stopped, started again. I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. For your son, for Marcus Reed, for all of it. Renee studied the woman across from her. She had spent so many years organizing her grief around a single villain that she hadn't considered what it would feel like to learn the truth involved an entirely different family, one who was now grappling with their own private horror, the discovery that someone they loved had taken a life and let another man pay for it. Did you know him well? Renee asked. Your brother? I thought I did. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. He used to come to Sunday dinners. He helped my kids with their homework. I keep trying to reconcile that person with... She gestured helplessly. I don't know how to hold both of those truths at once. I don't either, Renee admitted. I spent 11 years certain about something that wasn't true. I don't know what to do with the space where that certainty used to be. They sat together for a long while after that, two women with nothing in common except the worst thing that had ever happened to each of them, intersecting in ways neither had asked for. The exoneration hearing took place 14 months after Angela Ferris's first phone call. Renee sat in the same courthouse where, 11 years earlier, she had watched Marcus Reed get sentenced to life without parole. The room looked different to her now, not because anything about it had physically changed, but because she was seeing it through entirely different eyes. She remembered, with a kind of shame she hadn't expected, how certain she had been back then, how righteous her grief had felt. Marcus Reed sat at the defendant's table again, except this time his lawyer was Angela Ferris, and the document in front of the judge was a motion to vacate his conviction based on newly discovered evidence. The hearing took most of the day. The DNA evidence was presented. Curtis Boone's recantation was read into the record, his sworn statement detailing the deal he'd struck with Detective Ostrowski, a deal that had never been disclosed to Marcus's original defense team, in direct violation of the legal requirement to share such information. Phil Ostrowski himself had retired 6 years earlier and declined to testify, citing failing health, though Angela suspected the health issue was considerably less severe than claimed. And then, near the end of the proceedings, the judge asked if anyone from the victim's family wished to speak. Renee stood. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, but her voice, when it came, was clear. "My son's name was Devin Calloway," she said. "He was 19 years old. He loved music, and he was clumsy. And he called me every single day even after he didn't have to anymore. Someone took him from me, and for 11 years, I believed that someone was sitting in this courtroom paying for what he did." She turned briefly toward Marcus. "I was wrong, and I am not the only one who failed Marcus Reed. The detectives who stopped looking the moment they had someone to blame failed him. The witness who lied to save himself failed him. The system that moved faster toward a conviction than toward the truth failed him. And I failed him too, because I let my grief make me certain of something I had no real way of knowing." She faced the judge again. "I am asking this court to do what should have been done 11 years ago. Let this man go home. And then, and I am begging you for this, let someone, anyone, finally look honestly at what happened to my son. Because right now, after everything I have learned, I do not believe that has ever truly happened." The judge granted the motion to vacate that afternoon. Marcus Reed walked out of the courthouse, a free man on a gray Tuesday afternoon, 11 years and 4 months after he had been taken into custody for a crime he never committed. Renee was there. She had debated for days whether her presence would feel like an intrusion, whether Marcus would want anything to do with the mother of the boy whose death had cost him over a decade of his life. But when he stepped through the doors and saw her standing at the bottom of the steps, he walked directly toward her, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. "Thank you," he finally said. "Don't thank me," Renee said. "I should have asked harder questions a long time ago." "You asked them when it counted." They have stayed in touch in the years since. Not constantly. Their relationship remains complicated, shadowed by everything that connects them, by everything that should never have connected them in the first place. But on the anniversary of Devin's death, Marcus calls her, just to check in, just to make sure she isn't carrying the weight of that day alone. The investigation into Devin's actual murder was formally reopened, though with Greg Tillman dead and the original case so thoroughly mishandled, the official record remains frustratingly inconclusive, though the DNA evidence speaks plainly enough for Renee to have the answer she needs, even without a courtroom confirming it aloud. Detective Phil Ostrowski was never charged with any wrongdoing related to the case. He lives quietly in retirement 2 hours from the town where it all happened. Renee has never tried to contact him. She isn't sure what she would say if she did. She still keeps the newspaper clipping in the same drawer. But these days, when she takes it out, She isn't only thinking about her son, she's thinking about how easily certainty can be mistaken for truth and how long it can take sometimes for the difference between the two to come fully into the light.